that this is a bad time for our nation. We must look for foreign support to save this nation.
World news, sport, music, and many more. To listen to our programs, follow us live on all our social media platforms on Facebook at Aloore Radio, Twitter and Instagram at Aloore Radio. You can also subscribe on our YouTube page on Aloore Radio. Make sure you click on the notification bell so you know when we are live. This is Aloore Radio, the voice of Oyo State.
I know sometimes it be like say nobody send you. That's what I care for you, my friend. How do you know vex for me? Say I never call you since, but I hope that you are well. I hope your market sell. Every day I dey pray for you. Make you Baba God bless you. I never forget you. I gon' forget you. See my shoulder, make you rest upon me. You know I got you. Now me be your friend indeed. The money don't show now. I don't keep some for you. You know go so far. Cause anything I get now for me and you.
Good morning and welcome once again to the Business Clinic, the Law and Business Clinic on Aloore Radio. It's the radio show that provides entrepreneurs and business owners with expert insights and practical advice on legal issues affecting their business or their businesses. So once again, we are reaching you live from the studios of Aloore Radio at the Ministry of Information, Tourism and Culture. Excuse me. Oyo State Secretariat in the beautiful city of Ibadan. And of course, you can be a part of this program by joining on our social media platforms. That's Facebook, Instagram, as well as YouTube. Just search for Aloore Radio. You can also be sure to subscribe, like, and most importantly, share with your friends, your colleagues, your partners, your business partners, etc., etc., etc. So, let's jump right into it because we're already behind time. Today we'll be continuing our conversation on choosing the right legal structure for your businesses in Nigeria. So if you remember the past or the previous two episodes, we attempted to go into detail, as much detail as possible regarding different business structures, their advantages, their disadvantages, their strengths, their weaknesses, and how exactly they can affect your business. Today we'll do a recap of what we've done in the two previous or prior episodes, and then we will conclude on this topic. Now, I've taken my time. I've gone in depth as in depth as I possibly can into describing and explaining business structures in Nigeria because it is so foundational to your success as a business person or as an entrepreneur in Nigeria. Okay? So we'll just jump right into it. We'll do a recap and then we'll continue and then round up on this. And then next week, by the grace of God, we'll be talking about a totally different topic. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there are several types of business structures that are available to business persons, available to entrepreneurs in Nigeria. And so what we'll do today is, if you haven't listened to or watched the previous episodes, I would advise you go back to our platforms, go to YouTube, look for them and watch those because I don't want to go back and start to explain everything again. So today we'll try and look at some real life scenarios in an attempt to further explain what we've discussed before and then highlight advantages and disadvantages. So let's start with Femi. So Femi is a fashion designer. He works by himself. He works alone. And then he wants to register his business to sell his clothes, to sell his designs. What kind of business structure would be ideal for someone like Femi? I would say a sole proprietorship would be Femi's best bet. Why? Because he's working alone. He's working alone. He doesn't have anyone working with him, and it's an ideal setup for someone like Femi because it's easy to set up, it's easy to manage. He can manage the business all by himself. But Femi, of course, has to be aware that if his business, we'll call it Femi Fashions. So if Femi Fashions gets into financial difficulties, for instance, or Femi Fashions gets sued, what that means is that Femi himself would get sued and his personal assets or his personal finances would be at risk. Okay? So that's Femi Fashions, the sole proprietor. Now let's look at another scenario. And we would say in this scenario, we would say Ada and Bola, who are two good friends. They are best friends and they love to cook. And they've been cooking all their lives. And so they decided, you know what, we can turn this into a catering business. So the question now is, what kind of business would be ideal? What business structure would be ideal for Ada and for Bola? The simple answer would be a partnership. A partnership would be the ideal and the best legal structure for them because they can share the risks of the business and they can share the expenses of the business as well. They would, however, need to be aware that they would be jointly liable for all the debts and all the obligations of the business. Okay? Now let's look at another scenario. And in this scenario, we'll be talking about Tunde. Now, Tunde is a tech genius. And so, of course, he decides to set up a tech company. Okay? So, he has thought about it for a while and he doesn't know exactly what structure he would employ for his tech company. Well, simply put, the best structure for Tunde would be a limited liability company, otherwise called an LLC. Okay? Or what we will say a limited, but the technical term is limited liability company or LLC. So that would be the best legal structure or business structure for someone like Tunde because it would provide Tunde with limited liability protection. And what this simply means is that Tunde's personal assets would be protected if the business faces excuse me, if the business faces financial difficulties or the business gets sued. Okay? But one thing that Tunde would have to be aware of is the fact that limited liability companies are typically more expensive to set up and to maintain than either partnerships or sole proprietorships. And of course, another thing about limited liability companies is that they have a lot more regulatory oversight, right? And so what that simply means is that the regulations that Tunde Tech would have to comply with are more than the previous two companies, okay? So those are, we've talked about now, we've looked at the limited liability company, the partnership, and the sole proprietorship. Now let's look at a fourth scenario. Now, in this scenario, we'll be looking at Mrs. Johnson. So Mrs. Johnson is a very kind-hearted person. And having lost her parents at a very young age, now that she has decided to set up a charity organization to help orphans, right? And so what the question now would be, what is the ideal legal structure for a charity organization like what Mrs. Johnson wants to set up? Simple answer to that is what we call an incorporated trustee. An incorporated trustee or an incorporated trusteeship. Okay? So an incorporated trusteeship would be her best bet, okay? because it also offers the best legal protection for non-profit organizations. One thing that Mrs. Johnson would have to be aware of is the fact that an incorporated trustee, of course, is more complex to set up than any of the other business structures, any of the other legal business structures. There are also a lot more regulations to comply with, even more than the limited liability company, and definitely more than the partnership, definitely more than the sole proprietorship. Okay, so those are four. So these scenarios highlight the four legal structures or business structures that we have discussed in the last two episodes. So I'll mention them again. We started with the sole proprietorship. We went on to the partnership, then the limited liability company, and then finally the incorporated trustee. Now let's look at some of the disadvantages and the advantages of each of these business structures. We have discussed them before, but once again, I'm just going to use scenarios of these four scenarios to describe the advantages and disadvantages of each structure. So we spoke about Femi. Okay, so remember we said Femi is a designer and he has chosen to register his company or his business as a sole proprietorship. Okay, so what are the advantages of a sole proprietorship? Well, the first advantage of a sole proprietorship is that it is very easy to set up. It is the easiest of all the business structures to set up. Another advantage is that it is also the cheapest of all the businesses, all the business structures to set up. Now, it's important to note that Tunde is a sole proprietor. And so what that means is that he also does not have a board of directors or a body of shareholders to report to. He is the only director, he is the only shareholder, he is the man in charge. And so that is why we often refer to sole proprietorships as a one-man show. Okay, so those are the main advantages of a sole proprietorship. Now, one major disadvantage of a sole proprietorship, and this is one of the things that Femi would have to keep in mind, is that, and I mentioned this before, that if his business faces financial difficulties or if his business gets sued, then Femi should be ready and willing to forfeit his personal assets or his personal finances to the business. Okay, and so what that means is that his creditors will be able to come at him directly and recover from him the debts and the liabilities of his business. So the sole proprietorship does not offer that legal covering that the other business structures would give Femi if that's what he was doing. Okay, so that's the main advantage and the main disadvantage of the sole proprietorship. Now, let's look at Ada and Bola, right? So if you can recall, we said they've gone ahead and they've registered their catering business as a partnership. Okay, now what is the advantage of the partnership? Just like the sole proprietorship, the partnership is quite easy to set up. Okay, it is quite easy to set up. Now, the second advantage of a partnership is that because there are two or more people in a partnership, they get to share the risks, they get to share the liabilities of the business. So it's not just one person taking on the entire liabilities of the business or taking on the entire risks of the business. Now, I know in Nigeria they say, don't do business with anybody, own your business by yourself, because partnerships are so, you can't trust anybody. The truth is that there are legal coverings for partnerships. So it is to do it, if you're going to get into a partnership, you have to do it properly, do it right, execute all the right documents to protect yourself, your business, and also your partner in that business. Okay, so that's the main advantage. Like I said, they get to share the risks, they get to share the liabilities of the business. Now, the flip side of that coin is, even as that creates an advantage for them, it at the same time creates a disadvantage, which would be that if one person puts the company into debt or creates a liability in the operations of their business, both of them would be liable to pay that debt. Both of them would be liable to execute or to offset that liability of the organization. So if Ada, for instance, gets a contract, collects money to execute a contract for the business, a catering job for the business, and then the business goes into debt, both Ada and Bola would have to pay off that debt. So that is the major disadvantage of registering your business as a partnership. Now we'll take a 5 or a 2-minute break, and then we'll come back and we'll look at the remaining 2 business structures. Welcome back to the Law and Business Clinic on Aloore Radio. The Law and Business Clinic on Aloore Radio. Once again, my name is Akatu Ochai Esquire. I'm a legal practitioner, business lawyer, and certified negotiator. And you are listening to this and watching this live on Aloore Radio. Our social media handles are Aloore Radio on Instagram, Aloore Radio on YouTube, and of course you can look us up on Facebook at www.facebook.com/Aloore Radio. Okay, now we've been discussing and we've been looking at scenarios concerning business structures in Nigeria. Okay, we've been looking at the different types of business structures in Nigeria, and we've been painting scenarios and looking at real life scenarios to get a clearer understanding of what they entail and how to possibly avoid these pitfalls. Okay, now depending on the type of business you are running, listening to this should give you an idea of the ideal setup or the ideal business structure that would assist you and help your business to grow and to thrive. Now we've looked at, but currently we're looking at the disadvantages. We have talked about 2 different scenarios. We have looked at the disadvantages of the sole proprietorship, and we have looked at the disadvantages of the partnership. Now let's go to scenario 3, which would discuss the disadvantages of registering a limited liability company, as well as the advantages of, and I think we've discussed the advantages already. So let's look at the advantages and disadvantages of a limited liability company. So we've talked about Tunde, who went ahead to register a tech company. Okay, and we called it Tunde Tech. Now Tunde Tech has registered a limited liability company. Okay, and the advantage that this gives him, and I think I mentioned this before, is that it gives him limited liability protection, right? And so what that means is that by virtue of this type of business structure, his personal assets would be protected if the business faces financial difficulties or if the business gets sued. Okay? But of course, one major disadvantage of a limited liability company is that it is a bit more difficult, it is a bit more expensive to set up, to register, and to run than either the sole proprietorship or the partnership. Okay, so that's the main disadvantage. And I think that a second disadvantage really would be that would be what we would call the business bureaucracy that is involved in running a limited liability company. And what do I mean by that? I simply mean the fact that Tunde cannot on his own go ahead and make all the decisions and take all the actions involved in running the company. Why? Because he reports to a board of directors and he also reports to shareholders. Okay, so those are the main disadvantages of running a limited liability company. Now let's look at Mrs. Johnson's company. Okay, so if you remember, we said Mrs. Johnson wants to run a charity organization for orphan children. Okay, she wants to be able to provide books and clothing and opportunities for orphan children because she herself was an orphan. And so she has gone ahead and she has registered what we call an incorporated trustee. Okay, and if you want to know exactly what an incorporated trustee is and what it involves, I would advise you to go back to our previous episodes where we discussed this at length, right? So anyways, she has gone ahead and she has registered an incorporated trustee or an incorporated trusteeship, as the case may be. Now, the major advantage that this business type or this business structure offers to Ms. Johnson is that it offers her legal protection, which this type of structure often offers to non-profits or promoters of non-profit organizations. Okay, and so what this means is that she would not be personally liable in the event that the company gets sued, the organization gets sued. She would not be personally liable. Okay, of course the major disadvantage is that for incorporated trustees, the registration process is far more complex than any of the other business structures. It is far more complex. The company has to follow and comply with a lot of regulations which other companies do not have to comply with or do not have to go through. So yes, it's more technical, it is more difficult, more expensive, and it faces a lot more regulatory compliance issues than any other company. Okay, so those are the four major company types. Okay, their advantages and their disadvantages. So now at this point, like I said at the beginning of today's episode, we're simply doing a recap and we're trying to tie up the topic, conclude on this topic. Okay, so from the past two episodes and in this episode, we have discussed, let's look at what we have discussed. We've discussed the types of legal structures available in Nigeria. Okay, we have gone ahead and we have identified we have mentioned and highlighted each legal business structure. We have identified the advantages and the disadvantages of each one, right? And we have gone ahead and we have given scenarios using examples of the sole proprietorship, the partnership, the limited liability company, and of course the incorporated trustee. Okay, so just for clarity, the incorporated trustee is what we commonly refer to in Nigeria as the NGO. Okay, it's a non-profit organization or non-governmental organization, as we call it here in Nigeria. Okay, so we'll try and tie all this in by now. I mean, I think at this point, anyone listening should have had a clear idea of what type of business structure they would want to register for their business. Okay, what type of business structure best suits the type of business that they are doing. So if they're a one-man business, or if they are working in partnership with others, or they would want to separate the liabilities of the business from their own personal liabilities. These are some of the things that would inform your choice of the kind of business that you choose to register. Okay, now to end up this topic of business registration, we will now look at the process. Okay, the process of registering businesses in Nigeria. Okay, so now we're going to discuss the processes of registering your business in Nigeria. Now, of course, as most people know, it can be quite a challenging process and it can be time consuming, but it is very important, because if you remember, I said that your choice of business and the fact that you have registered your business can either make or break your business. Okay, the fact that your business is registered means that it operates legally and it is protected. It is legally protected. It is recognized by the government. It can access certain loans or other finances, grants that other businesses that are not registered cannot access, and so on and so forth. Okay, so let's look at the process of registering your business, making your business legit or legal. The first step in this, of course, would be to identify and register or choose your business, the name of your business. Now, there are certain things that one must consider when you are choosing the name of your company or the name of your business. One thing, of course, is that there are certain names that you cannot use for your business, right? So, as a private individual, you cannot register your business using the name of a state, the name of a local government, the name of a municipality or an area, so on and so forth. Okay, Commission would not register that name. Okay, so the first step is choosing your name. You choose your name by registering it on the CAC portal. Okay, that's the Corporate Affairs Commission portal. Now, once that is approved, you go to step 2, which would be to complete all the documents that are required for the registration of your business. Some of these documents would include the registration form, the memorandum and articles of association, statement of share capitals of directors, etc., etc., etc. So, statement of share capitals of directors, etc., etc., etc. So, those are the documents that you would have to register when you're registering your company. So, remember, the first step is choosing your name. The second step is filling in all the required documents. Now, once you've done that, you go ahead and you pay the required fees for registration. Now, of course, the fees would be determined by the type of business that you are going to register, or you have chosen to register. So if you can remember, I said the business name, the sole proprietorship, is the cheapest of all the business structures to register. And of course, the incorporated trustee is the most expensive of all the businesses to register. So once you've paid all your fees, you now submit that application for final approval, of course, by the Corporate Affairs Commission. Okay, so the Corporate Affairs Commission, the CAC, will review your application, and if it meets all the criteria, all the requirements, then your business will be registered. And then at that point, you'll obtain what is called a TIN, which is a taxpayer's identification number. Taxpayer's identification number. That is called a TIN. So every business requires a taxpayer's identification number. So once you've gotten that, you are free to run your business. You are free to open your account for your business. You are free to enter into agreements in the name of your business. Okay? And so that would now make you a bona fide business owner. As I always tell people, you are truly not an entrepreneur or a bona fide business owner until you have done the right thing, which is you have registered your company. Because until you have registered your company, that business does not exist in the eyes of the law. So, in conclusion, choosing the right legal structure for your business is very crucial. It determines your liability, it determines your tax obligations, it determines the level of regulatory compliance that would be required. And of course, as we have seen already, each legal structure has its own unique advantages and disadvantages. And it is essential to choose the one that suits your business and best fits your business needs. Now, when you're registering your business in Nigeria, of course, it's important to follow the required steps, okay, to ensure that your business operates legally and it is protected. And with that, we have come to the end of this topic on registering your businesses in Nigeria. And we hope that with all that we've said and all that we've discussed in the previous episodes and in this episode, you have been able to glean a lot of information and knowledge, and that you will, of course, put that information and knowledge to use in registering your businesses. We wish you all the best and all the success in the future. Thank you for listening to the Law and Business Clinic on Aloore Radio. And then join us next week, of course, when we will be discussing a totally different topic. Once again, God bless you and have an amazing day.
Study quote.